Now we're going to add a terrain and do a site plan for our building. I'll go down here to the first floor level, and then again I'm going to change my annotation set to the plot plan annotations, and that's going to automatically take me to my plot plan layer set. You can easily create a site plan if you go to the CAD drop-down menu and click on Plan Footprint. What you're looking at now is a 2D CAD page that has a window looking at the 3D model that we've built. You can't edit the model from here, but you'll notice here that we have the floor plan open. That's the 3D model. And you have the plan footprint. To create a site plan, we're just going to use CAD tools and draw 2D lines and points. We're going to create a site plan that looks just like this. When creating a site plan, you will need the legal description of your property, or you may be able to get an assessor's parcel map that shows the length and angle of each property line. We'll also add the setback lines and the dimensions. You'll notice here that here in my plan footprint layer set is active. When I was in the floor plan, I went to the plot plan layer set. So back here in the plan footprint layer set, I'll want to turn on a couple of layers that aren't turned on right now. We'll go to our layer display options, and here under CAD I'll turn on CAD plot plan. I'll go to the dimensions and turn on dimensions plot plan. The first thing I want to do is create a simple building footprint. To do this, I'll go to my floor plan and then click just outside of the building to select the exterior room. Chief designates this small area outside of all the exterior walls as a room. Then here in my edit toolbar, I'll select the Make Room polyline. That's created a simple 2D CAD polyline. Now I'm going to hold down my Control key and hit X to cut it from the floor plan and then take it to my plan footprint. Here I'll go to the Edit drop-down menu to paste and paste hold position. Now with my polyline in this view, I'll click on my Open Object tool, go to the Fill Style panel, and add an angled hatch. And I'll change the scaling of this angled hatch to 24 and click OK. So now I have a simple footprint for my plan. The next thing I want to do is create my property line. To start with, I'll go to the Point tool, and I'll go to the first tool, which is Place Point. And I'll place a point right here at that bottom left-hand corner. Now I'll go to the next tool, which is Input Point. I'm going to input a point relative to the current point, which is the first one I placed. And I want this point to start in the X direction, which is right and left on my screen, a negative 12 feet. In the Y position, or up and down on my screen, I want to move it down a negative 15 feet. And then click on OK. This is where my property line will start. Now I'll go to the Line tool, and I'll use the Input Line tool. And here I want to change the number style it's using. Right now it's using fractional inches and degrees. For my property line, I want to use decimal feet, and I want to use quadrant bearing angles. I'll go ahead and click OK here, and then I want to start relative to the start point, which is the last point I've created, and the distance of my first property line is going to be 86.5 feet. And the direction will be north 0 degrees east. Now I'll click OK. And we'll zoom out a little bit so that we can see the first line we've drawn. I'll go back to that line input, and we'll continue drawing our property lines. This is going to be relative to the start point, which is the last point of my last line. The distance on this property line is 75.17 feet, and the direction is south 83 degrees. For degrees, you can simply put a space, and then it's 27 minutes, which is a single quote, 6 seconds east. And now I'll click on Next. That will draw the next property line and that start point again. The next line will be 78 feet, and the direction will be south 1 degree, 58 minutes, 1 second, west. And I'll click on Next. The next line is going to be 72 feet, and the angle is going to be north 89 degrees, 58 minutes, 46 seconds, west. This time I'll click on OK. That completes my property line. Now I want to delete my points. You can't select a point to delete it, but you can, if you're in select mode, simply hit your delete key with nothing selected. That will delete the points in the reverse sequence that they were placed. Now I want to create a setback line. So the first thing I need to do is change to the concentric edit behavior. To do this, I'll go to my preferences and to edit and behaviors. And I want to use, instead of the default edit type, I want to use the concentric. And I want the jump to be 10 feet. I'll go ahead and click OK here. And you'll notice the icon that is following my cursor. That's to let me know that I'm still in concentric mode. Now I'll select that line that I want to copy, click on the Copy Paste tool, and then click on the corner of this polyline and drag it inward, and it will resize and jump to a 10-foot increment. I now have a line that's exactly 10 feet from the first line. Now I want to make sure to go back to my default edit behavior. So we'll go back to the Preferences, Edit, Behaviors, and click on Default. Now I want to change the line types. I'll select the setback line, double click on it, go to Line Style, and here I want a simple dashed line. And then I'll select the property line and double click on it, go to the Line Style, and you have many line styles to select from. For instance, I could use one of these with PL or property line in it, or just use a dash line. The other thing that I want to do with this line is I want a label on each of these lines to show the length of the line and to show the angle. So here under Display Options, I'll check these two boxes and click OK. Now the text on my property line is very small. The way to change this text is to change the text that's assigned to the layer that the line is on. So I'll select the line, use my Open Object tool, and here I'll go to Line Style, and I'm on the CAD Plot Plan layer. We'll go to the Define button to open up our layer display options. And here next to CAD Plot Plan, you can see the color, the line weight, the line style, and the text style that are assigned to this layer. I'll go down here to Text Style and I'll click on the drop down. The one that I want to use here is my Plot Plan text style, which is set up to print at 1/20th inch scale, so my text will be much larger. When I click OK now, you can see that the text on my line is perfectly readable as I zoom out. The next thing I want to do is add a couple of dimensions. So I'll go to my Dimension Tools and use the End-to-End Dimension tool. Then I'll click on the corner of the building and create a dimension to the side property line. Then I'll create another one from that same corner to the front property line. Now my dimension didn't locate that second line, but I can easily move the extension to go to this line instead. Now we'll just move these over just a little bit, and I'll create one more dimension line to show the setback. So now I've created my site plan. You can also use your CAD tools to show any driveways, roadways, or sidewalks. Once you've created a plan footprint, you can find this plan footprint again in your project browser under CAD Details. Here's my plan footprint. So I can close this now and access it again through the project browser. Now back here in my floor plan view, I want to create a terrain and use some terrain tools to show some sloping with this property. What I might want to do for reference is go back to my footprint, select the property line, and copy it into the floor plan view. So I'll hold down my Control key and hit C for copy, go to the floor plan, and go to Edit, Paste, and Paste Hold Position. I'll go ahead and double click on this, and here in the floor plan, I don't need to show the length and the angle. I just want to reference it when I draw my terrain. Now I could use this polyline and convert it into my terrain perimeter. If I click on the Convert Polyline tool and select Terrain Perimeter, but I want my terrain to be larger than my property so that I can show the roadway in front of it. So I'll go ahead and create a terrain perimeter. But first let's close up the project browser just so we have a little more room to work with. And then I want to go to a different toolbar configuration. So remember, we're in the default toolbar configuration. These are all of our basic building tools. But you also have your terrain configuration. In the terrain configuration, you have all of the tools where you can create a terrain, slope the terrain, and then create terrain features. So we'll go here first to the Terrain Tools and click on Create Terrain Perimeter. That will automatically create a rectangular terrain perimeter. Now, a terrain perimeter is essentially just a box. We'll take a look at this with your perspective full overview. So we now have this terrain perimeter that's providing the ground for our building. If you double-click on the terrain perimeter, under subfloor height above terrain, you have this setting for the distance between the terrain and the subfloor of the first floor level. It's adjusted automatically to 19.5 inches, but you can change this by unchecking the automatic box and then moving that height. For instance, I'll move this to 24 inches and click OK, and that'll move it down so there's more distance between the terrain and the first floor level. I'll go back to the floor plan view. Go ahead and close the footprint. Go back to the floor plan view. Before I start working with sloping the lot, I want to create another layer set, specifically for the terrain. Right now I'm using the plot plan set. I'll go here to my display options and I'll copy this plot plan set, and we'll call this terrain set. Then we'll select one of the layers in the list and then type T on the keyboard to take me down to the terrain layers, and then we'll turn on some of these terrain layers, and then I'll click on R and turn on all of the road layers. These are going to be all of the layers for my sidewalks, driveways, and then I'll go ahead and click OK, and then we'll change that terrain layer set to be our active layer set, and then we'll take a look at the terrain elevation tools. In the terrain elevation tools, you have your points, lines, splines, and elevation regions. We'll start here by using an elevation point. As soon as I place the elevation point specification dialog will pop up, and here's where you will assign a height to this elevation point. Right now it's at 0. 0 on the terrain is that level 24 inches below the first floor subfloor. I'll set the height of this point at 60 inches. And then we'll take a look again at that perspective full overview. And we can see here that that one elevation point raised the entire terrain up 60 inches because it has no other elevation data to relate to. So if I place another point, let's say on this corner, and assign a 0 to this one, I'll go ahead and click OK. You'll notice now that it's sloping from this point down to this point. And every other point on the terrain has to interpolate the height just from the information into points. Typically, elevation points are imported rather than placed manually. Chief Architect requires many points to make an accurate approximation of your site. Even small sites may require over 100 points to generate an accurate model of the terrain if it's sloped. So here, I'm going to go ahead and delete these terrain points. Then we'll take a look at the elevation line. I'll go ahead and place a couple of different lines here. One here, maybe one here, here, and here. And as each one of these are placed, if I open them up, it'll assign the 0 elevation to this line. I'll leave this one at 0. Then I'll assign a positive 60 inch to this one, a negative 60 inch to this one, so it's lower than that 0 line, and then a positive 60 inch here. And then we'll take an elevation view of this terrain. As you can see here, the terrain here is sloping from where that elevation line is, which is not at this edge, but it's going to be somewhere right about here. Each line creates an arc point. Chief will slope it up until it finds the next elevation line and interpolate all of these points between to curve this line. And from here it'll curve down to the negative 60 inch line and then come back up to that positive 60 inch line. You also have terrain splines, which is essentially just a curved line. So if I use a spline, we'll start by clicking and dragging a line for the first segment, and then draw a second segment from the end of the first one at a different angle. As soon as two straight spline segments connect end to end, the straight segment becomes a curve that passes through the endpoint defined by the original segment. Each point is called a vertex. This is another elevation line. If you open it up, you can assign the elevation height to it. You also have the elevation region. An elevation region is simply a closed polyline. And like the elevation line, you can assign an elevation height to it. And you also have the option to turn the interior of this area flat at this elevation, or interpolate tangent to the edge. Now before I slope my terrain, I want to draw a small deck on the front of the house. In our terrain tools, we have our railing tools parent tool, and here I'm going to use the straight deck railing tool. I'll just start here at this corner, click and drag straight down, drag straight across until I get that alignment indicator, that blue dotted line that says I'm aligned with the side wall, and then draw another one straight up. And then I'll select my deck and then just click on this temporary dimension and change this to a 48-inch depth and hit enter. And then we'll create a sloped terrain using a combination of elevation lines and elevation regions. The first thing I want to do is use an elevation region. And right here across the front of the house, I'll start here on the edge of the terrain and click and drag a terrain region that goes all the way just slightly out in front of my deck. And then if I double click on this, this is set at 0. That's where I want it. This is going to be what all of my other elevations will relate to. Now I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And then I'm going to use another elevation region and click and drag another one right down here at the front of the property. This one I'm going to have lower than the terrain is right at the front part of the house. I want this to be a negative 30 inches. And then on this flat terrain area, I want to create a roadway. So I'll go to my Road Tools parent tool and click on the straight road, and then I'm just going to click on this side of the property. I'm actually going to start this just outside of the terrain line and click and drag a road across the front of the terrain. And then I want to move this so that this roadway comes right to my property line. So here I want to use my point-to-point move tool. I'll zoom in a little bit, just click on the edge of the roadway and then click right on my property line. And then I want to make sure that the terrain edge goes all the way just past the roadway here. And then this negative 30-inch terrain region I'll use for the entire roadway. Take that right up to the property line as well. And then let's check this out in our perspective full overview. Now my terrain is coming up just a little bit high. I can tell because the garage door has ducked just below the terrain edge there. So I'm going to double click on this terrain, and right now it's set for 24. So I'm going to set this at 27 and go ahead and click OK. That'll put more distance between the terrain and that inside first floor subfloor, and that exposes the edge of my garage door, so that's about perfect. Now we'll go back to the floor plan, and then I want to add a driveway. So we'll go to the driveway tools, and then I'll start it right at the center point of that garage door and click and drag this driveway right to the edge of the roadway, and then maybe widen this out just a little bit. And then take a look again at that perspective full overview. And you can see what the driveway does is when it comes out and meets a roadway, it actually cuts the curb of the roadway to allow for the driveway. Now we'll go back to that floor plan. And here I want to draw a couple of retaining walls to sort of create a tiered effect right here. I'm going to take this region back right to the edge of the deck. And then we'll go to our terrain wall and curb tools. And in your terrain wall and curb, you have the terrain wall. The terrain wall will actually follow the slope of the terrain. I'll go ahead and draw one just for example. And then we'll go back to that camera view. And as you can see, the wall itself will actually follow and dip down with the slope of the terrain. In those terrain wall tools, you also have the retaining walls. I'll use a straight retaining wall. And we'll just start right here on the edge of the property and click and drag a retaining wall just a little ways across. And then I want to click and drag another one because I want a double tier here. Click and drag another one just a little ways further. And then with an elevation region, I want to establish the height between these two retaining walls. I'm going to go back to my elevation tools and use my elevation region. And then I'm going to click and drag an elevation region right here between these two walls. I'm actually going to snap right to those walls. And then I'll break it right here at this point. Now these are all your terrain and your elevation regions and your terrain features are all polyline based objects and can be edited just like any polyline. Then I'll double click on this region, and I want this to be right at a negative 15 inches, halfway between the elevation here at 0 and the elevation here at 30. And then we'll take a look again at that overview. So now I have these two retaining walls, and if we spin this around a little bit, you can see that that area between the two retaining walls is flat. It'll be more obvious if I take a hold of that terrain region and drag it right out to the edge. And then take a look at that camera view again. And you can see here that my terrain steps down, is retained behind the retaining wall, flattens out, and then is retained behind this one, and then slopes down. Now I'll open up my library browser, and I'm looking for stacked stone. And we'll select the stacked stone in the library browser. That will activate my material paint tool, and I'm just going to click right here on the wall to change that to a stacked stone wall. Go ahead and close up that library browser again. And that's looking pretty good. Now obviously the only thing I need here is stairs that go from my deck down to the terrain. So we'll go to the floor plan view, and here I'm going to go to my stair tools. Now my stair tools are not in the terrain toolbar configuration. So I'll go back to the default toolbar configuration, and here's my stair tool. And remember, this stair can be used in a couple of different ways. You can either click to create one straight staircase, or you can click and drag to create more than one stair. There's another way. In the floor plan view, if I click on the outside edge of my railing, Chief will automatically create a staircase. It'll calculate the distance between the deck and the height at the terrain where it ends. Then I'll go ahead and double click on these stairs. Go to Newels and Balusters, make sure there's railings on the left and right, and I'm going to change the width here to 48 inches. And then I want to make sure that my stairs center on my door, so I'll use my Center Object tool and then hover right over that door to center it. And we'll take a look again at that perspective full overview. Now if we want to landscape this, we'll go back to that floor plan view. Go to our layer display options and make sure that the layer for plants is turned on. Let's turn this on. Click OK. And then we'll go back to the terrain toolbar configuration and use a terrain feature. You have garden bed tools, water feature tools, terrain feature tools, and terrain modifier tools. Here we're just going to use a garden bed tool, and there's a rectangle, a circle, or a kidney shape. We'll just use the rectangle, and we'll create a little garden bed right here between these two walls. And again, polyline based object. I'm just going to edit this by breaking it right at the end of the wall, and then I'll just angle that down a little bit. Take a look again at our full overview, and we can see that we now have a little garden bed. If I double click on this and go to the materials panel, right now this is using this mulch pine bark in the landscaping folder. If we want to change this to a different color or a different type, and we can apply a different material here. So now I've got a little bit of bark in there. If I go back to my floor plan view and open up that library browser, you also have plants. So let's go back to the browser by clicking on this button. In our Chief Architect Core Catalogs, we have the Plant folder. Inside of this Plant folder, you have hundreds of selections of everything from flowers to shrubs to trees. You also have the Plant Chooser. In the Plant Chooser, you can search for plants by their common name or scientific name, or type, or subtype. You can also filter the plants for hardiness zone. So if you're not sure what your hardiness zone is, where your property is, you'll want to go to View Map, and that'll show you different areas and the different hardiness zones for your plants. You can learn more about the Plant Chooser and additional online training videos. But for now, let's just go to Shrubs, and let's go to Evergreen, and we'll just select this shrub. And here I'm just going to place a couple of shrubs in my planter between these two walls. So you can complete your design by landscaping your terrain. You can slope it, create retaining walls, fences, add some plants, trees, rocks, and ground cover. The next thing we want to do is create a layout for construction drawings.